Fear was my God before God ever was. I wasn't taught to love God. I was taught not to make him angry. It made its first appearance quietly. A question. What if what they're teaching, what we're being taught, is wrong? I didn't say it out loud. I wouldn't have dared. Not back then. Back then, questions weren't invitations, they were offenses. And doubt wasn't a step toward truth. It was sin. But the question lived in me anyway. It didn't roar. It didn't rage. It wasn't there to dismantle everything all at once. It was quieter than that. More like a whisper I couldn't unhear. A shifting beneath the foundations of things I'd once thought immovable. I was just entering my teenage years when my world cracked open. My parents' marriage, already weakened by silence and volatility, finally collapsed under the weight of my father's alcoholism. I didn't understand the full story at the time, but I felt the implosion in my bones. What once seemed broken now felt destroyed. After the divorce, we left everything behind. My mom packed what little we had and moved us to her childhood hometown in western Iowa, along the Missouri River. We settled in a rusted trailer on the edge of town. It wasn't home. It was survival. She went back to school to build a future for us, carrying the weight of that choice on her back with a kind of quiet desperation that still makes my chest ache. We were poor. Not tight budget poor, actual poor, scraping by poor, government cheese poor. I watched classmates walk into school in name brand sneakers while I silently prayed mine wouldn't fall apart before winter. There was shame in every meal, tension behind every bill, and a slow, invisible grief that hovered in the corners of every room. But maybe the greatest loss wasn't material. Perhaps it was spiritual. We had to leave the church I'd grown up in, the place that, for all its fear and pressure, at least offered me structure. Familiarity. A social world I understood. The church in Iowa was nothing like it. A barely functioning congregation. A handful of aging members. Hymns sung off-key in a sanctuary that echoed with absence. Most of the congregation was deaf or hearing impaired, and the pastor's son was deaf himself. So much of the service was signed from the pulpit, accompanied by a slow, steady voice trying to reach two worlds at once. In its own way, it was beautiful, but to me, it only deepened the sense of isolation. I couldn't connect, I didn't belong, and the God they spoke of still felt just as far away. I had hoped things would feel different in this new place, less intense, less frightening. But even in that quiet, crumbling room, I heard the same old messages in different voices. God is watching. You are unworthy. Don't mess it up. Both churches, one large and bustling, the other barely surviving, ran on the same fuel, fear. And fear didn't just belong to the pulpit. It spilled into dinner tables and youth groups. It bled through headlines and Christian books, curling like smoke into every crevice of my world. I still remember the wave of panic in 1988, the year everything was supposed to end. That year, a former NASA engineer turned Bible student from Arkansas named Edgar Whisenant released a book called 88 Reasons Why the Rapture Will Happen in 1988. It was passed around like gospel. He predicted that Christ would return between September 11 and 13 during Rosh Hashanah. He even said World War III would follow. People around me took it seriously, terrifyingly seriously. And I was just a kid. What chance did I have? What language did I have to distinguish wild speculation from eternal consequence? When grown-ups were stockpiling food and whispering about trumpets and tribulation, how could I not listen with my whole trembling heart? I couldn't sleep that week. I remember lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, wondering if I'd vanish in my sleep or wake to find everyone else gone. I remember whispering silent prayers, begging forgiveness, just in case. I remember feeling certain I wouldn't be chosen. The fear of being left behind wasn't metaphorical. It was the air I breathed. It didn't just come from church. It came from culture. From people who said they loved me. From a God I was told might leave me anyway. So I learned how to look faithful. I said the right things. I raised my hands at the right moments. I even cried during altar calls. But I wasn't moved by love. I was managed by fear. I didn't pray to connect. I prayed to be spared. I didn't worship to draw near. I worshiped to avoid wrath. I didn't long for God's heart. I just wanted his judgment off my back. Even the sermons didn't need fire and brimstone to make the message clear. God is holy. You are not? Try harder, be better, do more. or else. So I tried, I performed, I said what they needed me to say, but I was terrified all the time. Fear became the background hum of my life, the soundtrack of my spiritual effort. Fear of hell, fear of being left behind, fear of never getting it right. Fear that my doubts, my questions, my numbness were just more proof that I wasn't one of the chosen. And the rules didn't help. The religious world I lived in was deeply legalistic, obsessed with outward appearance, strict codes of conduct, and unwritten rules you dared not break. If you owned a television, you were flirting with hell. If you watched a movie, even just a PG one, you were lost. Girls couldn't wear pants. Boys couldn't wear shorts. Hair had to stay uncut for girls, neatly trimmed for boys. No secular music. No sports. No jewelry. No alcohol. Swimming with the opposite sex? Sinful. Missing church? Dangerous. Skipping paying your required tithe? Thief. It wasn't religion. It was eternal risk management. Every decision had cosmic weight. Every expression of self was Russian roulette with your soul. And when you're a child in that system, you don't challenge it. You internalize it. You start to believe that love is earned, safety is fragile, and salvation is barely within reach, if at all. There was no space for natural curiosity, no room for grace, no image of God as tender. Just rules, just threats, just fear. And then came puberty. It's one thing to fear hell as a child. It's another to try and outrun it as a teenager. My body changed. My thoughts swirled. My emotions grew unpredictable. But the expectations didn't budge. No space for hormones. No room for struggle. No permission to be human. Lust wasn't seen as development. It was damnation. Curiosity wasn't part of growing up. It was rebellion. Desire, any desire, meant danger. And that was the terrifying part. It only took one mistake. If the rapture came in the middle of a lustful thought, if Jesus returned just after I'd let my eyes linger, if I failed to confess a sin in time, even one, I was gone. Left behind, burned forever, damned with the rest of them. That's what I was taught. And that's what I believed. There was no room for growing up in that theology, no allowance for immaturity, just high stakes, and a God who seemed always watching, always silent, always ready to punish. So I learned to hide, to perform, to lie by omission, to apologize before I even admitted to anything. I learned to hate myself for being a teenager, because in that world, to be a teenager was to live constantly on the edge of spiritual catastrophe. And yet, the only place I felt even a flicker of hope was the same place that kept wounding me, church. It didn't make sense, but in a life ruled by anxiety, my only hope was survival. Just get to Sunday. Just survive the week. Maybe this time I'd make it through the sermon, through the altar call. Maybe I'd be clean again. Maybe I'd be safe. It always came near the end, after the music, after the sermon, after another hellfire monologue from a pastor more concerned with tithes than the trembling teenager 6 rows back. And then the lights would dim, the music would slow, the call would come. We'd rise from our seats, avoiding eye contact, and shuffle forward like repeat offenders. We knelt, we cried. We shook beneath the weight of another week of failure. Then came the sweaty hands, the shouting voices, one yelling, "Hold on," another shouting, "Let go." And caught in the middle, you didn't know which part of yourself to obey or surrender. You stayed there, trembling, hoping you'd done enough, hoping to pray through again, to speak in tongues again, as proof that God still hadn't given up on you. Yet, never mind that none of it was required by the early church. Never mind that Jesus never turned salvation into a performance. In our world, this was the test. If you hadn't spoken in tongues recently, God hadn't accepted you. If the rapture came before you did, you were lost. And even as I knelt there, surrounded by noise and confusion, that same question kept whispering through the cracks. What if they've been wrong all along?